Messages should avoid opining on the fairness or integrity of an electoral process. This single, chilling sentence, buried deep within a sensitive government cable, sent a shockwave through the world of international diplomacy. It was a gag order, a direct and unambiguous command from the highest levels of the Trump administration, effectively telling American diplomats, the very people sent abroad to champion the nation's ideals, to look the other way, to stay silent in the face of stolen elections. This wasn't some minor policy adjustment. It was a public execution of decades of American foreign policy. The United States, the nation that had long positioned itself, however imperfectly, as the world's leading advocate for democracy, was officially stepping down from the podium. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on this monumental and controversial shift. We will dissect the secret directive sent on July 17th, a document that ordered America's powerful voice abroad to fall silent on the very principles it claimed to hold most dear. We will investigate the true motivations behind this stunning order, tracing them back to a pivotal speech President Donald Trump delivered not in Washington, D.C., but in the heart of Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. And crucially, we will expose the breathtaking hypocrisy of an administration that demanded absolute silence on fraudulent elections, while simultaneously and loudly interfering in the domestic politics of its own Democratic allies. What was the real endgame here? Was this a principled stand for respecting national sovereignty, or was it a cynical strategy to create a world more welcoming to autocrats and strongmen? Let's begin. Let's travel back in time to July 17th. Imagine for a moment that you are a United States ambassador stationed in a fledgling democracy, a nation tentatively taking its first steps away from authoritarian rule. An election has just concluded, and the political air is thick with tension and credible accusations of ballot stuffing, rampant voter intimidation, and a deeply corrupted vote count. Your every instinct, honed by years of diplomatic training and a belief in American values, is to issue a statement. You want to express grave concern, to gently yet firmly nudge the country's leaders back towards a democratic path, to use the immense influence of the United States as a force for good. You think of the brave local journalists you met for coffee just last week, the student activists who spoke of their dreams for a transparent government, the elderly woman who showed you her ink-stained finger with pride. To stay silent now would not just be a policy failure, it would feel like a personal betrayal of those very people America had always claimed to support. But then, a cable arrives from Washington. It is marked sensitive, a classification designed to keep its contents from prying eyes and the public record. The message, authorized by none other than Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is brutally and shockingly clear. The State Department, it declares, will no longer issue any election-related statements from Washington unless there is a clear and compelling foreign policy interest. Suddenly, your hands are tied. The cable continues, laying out the new, sterile rules of engagement. Even in the rare case that a comment is deemed appropriate, it must be stripped of all moral substance and meaning. Your message, the directive dictates, should be brief, focused on congratulating the winning candidate, and, when appropriate, noting shared foreign policy interests. No more talk of cherished values, no more calls for transparency or accountability, just a cold, robotic congratulations, regardless of how the victory was achieved. But the most chilling line, the one that truly encapsulates the new doctrine, is the one we started with. Messages should avoid opining on the fairness or integrity of an electoral process, its legitimacy, or the democratic values of the country in question. It was a direct command to ignore reality, to legitimize the illegitimate, to smile and shake the hand of the electoral thief, all in the name of a cold, hard pragmatism. And to ensure absolute, unwavering compliance, the directive fundamentally altered the chain of command. No ambassador, no consul, no diplomat in the field could issue such a statement without explicit, personal approval from the Secretary of State himself or a handful of his most senior, trusted leaders. The message from the top was unambiguous. You no longer work for the cause of democracy. You work for us. Your job is not to be a beacon of freedom, but to be a silent, obedient functionary of a new transactional world order. Why would an American administration implement such a radical reversal of policy? The cable itself provides the most significant clue, directly referencing a major speech that President Donald Trump had given just a couple of months earlier, on May 13th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The choice of venue was, in itself, a powerful and deliberate statement. To stand in the capital of an absolute monarchy, a kingdom with no democratic elections and severe restrictions on human rights, and declare an end to lectures on governance was an act of profound symbolic importance. It was a signal to every strongman and autocrat in the audience and listening around the world: the old rules are gone. He harshly criticized what he derisively called Western interventionists, a clear and pointed swipe at previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic, who he believed had wasted time and resources telling other countries how to govern themselves. This era, he declared, was over. Washington was officially getting out of the business of nation-building and democracy lecturing. Instead, he announced, the United States was looking to forge partnerships. The criteria for these new partnerships were not to be shared democratic values, a free and independent press, or a mutual respect for human rights. The new, and essentially only criterion, was whether a country's strategic interests align with those of the United States. The gag order sent to diplomats was the logical, and to many, the terrifying conclusion of this philosophy. A State Department spokesperson, when asked by journalists about the cable, reinforced this view, stating that this new hands-off approach was consistent with the administration's emphasis on national sovereignty. But what did that phrase, national sovereignty, truly mean in this new context? For generations, the United States had argued that true sovereignty is derived from the consent of the governed, from free and fair elections where the people choose their leaders. Now, the term was being twisted and redefined. In the new lexicon of the Trump administration, sovereignty became a convenient shield for dictators and autocrats, a rhetorical justification for ignoring the will of the people. It meant that a ruler's power, no matter how it was obtained or brutally maintained, was absolute and not to be questioned by outsiders, especially not by the United States. This was the America First doctrine applied on a global scale, a calculated retreat from moral leadership in exchange for what the administration viewed as practical, interest-based alliances. The promotion of democracy was now seen not as a core American value, but as an annoying, unprofitable interference in the internal affairs of potential customers and strategic partners. This represents a truly profound rewriting of America's role on the world stage. If you're finding this exploration of the political doctrine behind the headlines valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button. It tells our team you appreciate this deeper level of analysis and want to see more content just like it. To fully grasp the sheer magnitude of this policy change, we have to understand what it replaced. For over a century, the United States has, at least in its public rhetoric, viewed the promotion of human rights and democracy as a central pillar of its foreign policy. This was never applied perfectly or consistently, and critics have rightly pointed out the glaring hypocrisy of supporting brutal dictators who happen to be useful anti-communist allies or sat atop vast oil reserves. The double standards were real, and they often damaged American credibility. Yet, the stated ideal remained a powerful force in the world. American diplomacy was frequently a tool, however imperfectly wielded, used to support political dissidents, fund free media organizations, send observers to monitor elections, and apply pressure on authoritarian regimes to reform. This was considered not just a moral imperative, but a strategic one. The long-held belief in Washington was that democracies are more stable, more predictable, and far less likely to go to war with each other. Promoting democracy was seen as a long-term investment in a safer, more prosperous world for America. Under the Trump administration, this entire framework was not just ignored, it was actively dismantled with contempt. The very idea of democracy promotion was dismissed as the naive, globalist project of a failed political establishment. This sentiment was most visible in the internal restructuring of the State Department itself. The agency's own Human Rights Bureau, once a powerful and respected voice within the U.S. government, was systematically sidelined, its budget cut, and its mission reshaped. The administration's public justification was that the Bureau had become a platform for left-wing activists to wage vendettas against anti-woke leaders. This characterization was a gross distortion of the Bureau's critical function. For decades, its annual human rights reports were the gold standard, a meticulously documented and sober assessment of the state of freedom in nearly every country on Earth. These reports weren't just academic exercises. They had real-world consequences. They guided congressional decisions on foreign aid, provided crucial evidence for asylum seekers fleeing persecution, and gave international journalists and local activists the backing of the U.S. government to demand accountability. Gutting its influence and dismissing its work as a vendetta was akin to turning off the lighthouses along a treacherous coastline. It was a deliberate choice to embrace the darkness. This internal purge sent a clear and chilling signal to every diplomat and career civil servant. The old rules were dead. The new currency of American foreign policy was not freedom or justice, but transactional alignment and ideological purity as defined by the White House. So the new rule from the very top was simple and clear. Respect national sovereignty. Do not interfere, do not opine, stay silent. But it is here that our story takes its most cynical and revealing turn. Did the Trump administration and its senior officials actually follow their own directive? Did they respectfully stay out of the domestic affairs of other sovereign nations as they demanded their diplomats do? Not for a single second. The principle of non-interference was applied with surgical selectivity. While U.S. diplomats were ordered to remain silent on sham elections and power grabs in authoritarian states, top Trump officials were incredibly vocal when it came to the internal politics of America's oldest and closest democratic allies in Europe. They repeatedly and publicly weighed in on the domestic affairs of Romania, Germany, and France. But they were not intervening to defend democratic norms or institutions. In fact, they were doing quite the opposite. They were loudly denouncing what they perceived as the suppression of right-wing and nationalist leaders in those countries. They accused European authorities of using legitimate concerns over disinformation as a cynical pretext to censor conservative views they happened to agree with, such as harsh criticism of immigration policies. The contradiction was breathtaking. The administration would openly champion populist figures in Europe who challenged the post-war liberal order, praised Brexit, and questioned the value of core alliances like NATO. Officials would tweet support for specific political movements in sovereign democratic nations, effectively taking sides in their internal elections and debates. This wasn't non-intervention, it was targeted ideological intervention. The sovereignty of a close democratic ally like Germany was apparently open to criticism and meddling, while the sovereignty of a distant autocracy rigging an election was to be held sacred and inviolable. This revealed that the true policy was never non-interference at all. The real policy was to interfere on behalf of ideological allies and to completely abandon those fighting for democracy if they were not deemed strategically useful. This blatant hypocrisy did not just undermine American credibility on the world stage. It sent a clear and dangerous message to would-be dictators around the world. As long as you are on our side, you have a green light. America will not only stay silent about your transgressions, it will be the first to congratulate you on your victory. What we have uncovered here is far more than just a single government cable or a subtle change in diplomatic language. It was a fundamental and deliberate re-engineering of the purpose of American power. A gag order was placed on diplomats, silencing them on the core issues of electoral fairness and human integrity. This was justified by a new, cynical ideology of national sovereignty and strategic interests, first articulated by President Trump in Riyadh, which prioritized transactional relationships over shared democratic values. And this entire framework was built on a foundation of staggering hypocrisy, as the very administration that demanded silence on stolen elections loudly interfered in the politics of its democratic allies to support its ideological friends. So we are left with a series of haunting questions. Was this policy a genuine, if misguided, attempt to stop American meddling in the world? Or was it a cynical ploy to make the world safer and more comfortable for authoritarianism? By abandoning its historic role as a promoter of democracy, did the United States create a moral and political power vacuum, one that has been eagerly filled by global rivals with far different and more dangerous values? The answer quickly became apparent. Global rivals, particularly China and Russia, eagerly stepped into the void. Their model of influence offered a seductive alternative for struggling regimes: vast infrastructure loans, advanced surveillance technology, and unwavering political support, all with no inconvenient strings attached regarding human rights or democratic reforms. They offered a partnership in authoritarianism, a validation of the strongman model. The world began to polarize, not just between democracies and autocracies, but between two competing visions of international order. One, however flawed, based on a set of shared values, and another based on pure transactional power where might makes right. And what is the long-term price that the world, and America itself, will pay for this calculated silence? The echoes of that July 17th directive are still shaping our global landscape in profound ways. To continue exploring the hidden forces and secret decisions that define our era, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and have your notifications turned on. The next story we uncover might just change the way you see the world.